I'm sorry, I'm in my
No,
own world
you're doing
here.
the same thing I just said.
All right, well,
Mirroring.
I'm going to go ahead and get started,
Yes.
and hopefully Jesui is on her way or circling the parking lot trying to
Yeah,
find
there
it.
were like 3 cars when I walked across.
Yeah, at some point it empties out because if my later classes, when I teach them, when I hit that lot, it's half empty, and then by the time I come out after the class, I'm like the only car left in the
I
parking
just have
lot.
to hit it right, I think.
Yeah, you just cross fingers. All right, so we've got a few things on the docket for tonight. Just want to start by, as I will generally do, just kind of recapping last week and making sure everybody's good with what happened and what's it called, debriefing a little bit on anything that you worked on over the course of the past week. Because all but one of you were in last night's class, we are going to do a little Addy review, but I know that most of you were there, and Yolanda, I think you were the only one who wasn't.
In the actual class?
Not for this class. It's a different class, but we covered this topic in the other class.
Gotcha.
So the rest of them kind of got an introduction last night to it. But we'll do a quick review thing, and you'll come up to speed on it really fast, So, but that is something in this class. We're going to use that model in both of the courses whenever we're at a point of designing something instructional. So you're going to use it when you're working on your actual Powtoon project. You will also be using it when you do your gamification and when you're working on your full game project. So I just want to make sure that everybody's really clear on that. But like I said, we should be able to hit that pretty fast tonight and not spend a ton of time on it. Then I want to talk about another framework, and I hate to be piling frameworks on top of frameworks, but this one is one that I use specifically related to multimedia projects. I call it the 4 C's. And basically, it's just a way to check yourself and to check other people's work as well in terms of some of the things that are common downfalls when it comes to timeline-based media. So audio projects fall under this category, movies fall under this category, animations, which is why we're going over it in this class, fall into that category. So it's just a little framework that I've come up with that seems to work pretty well to just try to catch common mistakes or common issues with videos and animations and audio projects as you create them. So I've got a few videos that I located online that are all animated instructional videos. And once I've gone through the 4 C's, introducing it, we're going to break up into a couple of groups, and you're going to look at these videos I've selected and try to grade them or assess them based on the 4 C's and just kind of have some conversations. Figure that way, if you've assessed another project and are knowing what to look for, then when you're working on your own projects, you can likewise try to keep an eye open for those types of issues. So we'll take a look at that. And then the remainder of the class tonight is going to be getting really into Powtoon. I did take a look through your responses to the just sort of poking around. That's totally all right. Poking around in Powtoon over the course of this past week. Most of the things I saw people bring up in terms of issues or concerns or questions are things we are definitely going to be addressing. So there's no worries there. I didn't expect you to figure everything out all in 1 week, all on your own. So what I'm going to do over the next 2 weeks is kind of divide it up this way, where tonight is what I call what the stuff is. So we're basically just going to look at the content that you can put into Powtoon. And some of the basic settings that go along with a lot of that content. Then next week, the focus is going to be on what I call what the stuff does. And that is going to be focusing on the animation aspects, the motion aspects. A lot of you had questions about the timeline. We're going to be covering that next week. So kind of breaking it up that way. So you can focus just on getting content into a slide this week. And then next week, once you're comfortable with that, we can focus on getting the stuff to move and do stuff. So basically, by the end of tonight, you should be able to create kind of, for lack of a better term, PowerPointy kinds of things where you have a slide, and when that slide starts, it's got stuff that's on that slide. And some of the stuff will do stuff tonight, but that's sort of built-in stuff. And then what we'll look at next week is kind of the stuff that PowerPoint doesn't do so well, which is moving things around and having things appear and disappear and having things rotate and all that kind of fun stuff. So that'll be over the course of next week. So I'll go through all of that. You'll all be in Powtoon at the same time, so you'll be having fun just adding stuff and building silly scenes and so on. And then we'll wrap up tonight with what the work is for next week and call it a night. So that is our plan. So to start with, last week, any comments, any questions that came up that you think may not be addressed, or any issues you ran into? I had one thing pointed out to me that I have to apologize for, and here, even being a professor of educational technology, it happens to all of us. The video I made of last week's class has no audio to it because I forgot the software that I use to screen record. I forgot that there's a setting you have to go into to tell it what audio input to be listening to, and it doesn't default to the computer's microphone. It actually defaults to none. And once I've done it once, it will now remember it. And I guess I was just thinking, oh, well, I did this all last year. But obviously sometime between last year and this year, they've reset the settings or something. So there's a wonderful video up there of everything that was on my screen, but you have to kind of puzzle out what I'm actually saying during the whole thing. So I apologize for that. You were all here last week, so it shouldn't really be a big issue. And I did double check it tonight and verify that yes, indeed, the microphone is now connected. So we should be good from here on out. So I do apologize for that. So that it happens to all of us. You just got to go with it and do what you can. Yeah. So any other comments or anything related to the work from last week? Was it a workable amount of work?
Totally.
What I'm going to do, I think I mentioned this last week, that I like to do is to take your inspirational quotes, and I will actually generate a Powtoon off of those. Hopefully, I'll have it by next week. We'll see how this week goes. Just kind of for fun and just kind of to show what you can do with Powtoon. So I'll be getting that up there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is Powtoons very expensive?
To be honest, I don't know what the individual pricing structure is right now.
It said it right on there, I think.
Did it?
When it went on there, it was like 49, 59, like 99, or maybe that was something different.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it. I'm at a different level because I'm
Yeah.
doing an educational purchase for a class, which gives
Because I
me
was talking to her,
seats
I'm
and
like, oh my god, my kids are all excited. Every time I'm going to learn something new, I tell my class,
Yeah.
you can show us that? And she's like, you won't be able to because you have the access to the thing that because of
Yeah.
We would only be approved for a free version.
Free versions.
Probably.
Gotcha. Yeah.
which is the watermark or whatever the
Yeah,
Yes.
you get that on there,
Yeah.
and if it's a free version, they also limit the content you can
Yeah.
pull from. They kind of do.
Because there were 3 levels on the thing I saw. Do we
Okay.
have the highest level?
Yeah. probably not.
With if you're in my class, you have access to all their content. So
Okay.
I'm at, I forget what it's called, Education Supreme or something like that. So, but that also, I'm purchasing seats, so I can have up to 50 students at a time that are under my umbrella. But like I said, I actually haven't looked at if you're just going on as an individual user. What's that? 19 a month?
For how many? Just for yourself?
But you
That's-
only
Oh, I
get
thought that was for a whole year, that's
No,
why.
you
For- I
get
thought it was for,
like
like, your class.
5 premium exports per month, which I don't know what that means. Well, like
Yeah,
that,
being
or
able to
content
export
expensive.
videos
Okay.
that include the premium content.
Okay.
So there are other, and I'll make sure to set aside some time a little down the road. This is not the only game in town. There are other things out there. And I mean, honestly, it depends on what level you want to get into it, but some of the techniques and strategies we're going to look at, you might even be able to then execute in PowerPoint. I mean, probably not to the same level with some of the elements, but even kind of getting an introduction to the way animation works and just kind of thinking about how items can interact on a screen, there is a fair amount you can do in a program like PowerPoint or something like that by working with their transitions and the way that items can come in and go out and so on. So there will be some applicable skills even if you don't continue to have access to Powtoon.
But if you make one, do you have that forever? Is it like a document then you have, or do you always need the program to?
Well, when you export it, once it's exported, it's a standalone video. And that
Of
you've
And
got.
so
You
you
can
have.
post that to YouTube, you can save that on your hard drive.
Okay.
If you want to edit it, you would need to have
okay.
access to Powtoon because that's the creation platform.
Okay. And probably, depending, you're always gonna wanna have that with your individual classes.
If you're creating new content or needing to go back and adjust existing content. But it's something to look into, and like I said, this isn't the only game in town. In fact, a couple of videos we're going to look at tonight when we're analyzing them were done in, now I can't remember what it's called. It's another one of the more popular ones. But I usually once we get into things, I'll set aside a time and kind of point out here are some other versions of programs that do stuff like this. This just happened to be, this is, I'd say Powtoon is one of the most popular, maybe top 2 or 3, and I wanted to pick one, so I went with Powtoon. And it's what they've used in this course, in this program before even I started teaching here. So that's that. So, all right. Anything else? Good to move on. All right, so let's just kind of get Addie out of the way, our friend Addie. And I just, this would be kind of by way of just for yourself, if you were in last night's class, just kind of seeing what you remember and what you can generate. And as I said, we do have one person here who was not in last night's class and should definitely kind of make sure that they're on board with this material. So I just did this, and again, I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but I want to make sure everyone's good with it. I just created a quick little grid like this, and I've got it on paper, so you can do this on paper. You don't have to do it online. And I would say, maybe we'll split the class in half. So 4 in one group, 3 in another. I guess if we want to do 2 and 3, we can do that too, whatever. But just take one of the grids for the group and just quickly go through and remind yourself of what each of the letters is. And then in the space underneath, maybe just jot down a couple of things of like what are the activities or what are the questions that you want answered in each of those 5 areas, right? So it's a review, or it's an introduction, or it's a follow-up, or it's a refresher, or whatever you want it to be. And then if questions come up or anything, we can discuss it further. But since we are going to be using this model in this class as well, I just want to make sure we're good with it. All right. So I hate dividing, especially adults, up into groups. So I'm assuming you guys can probably go 4 and 3 pretty easily, however you want. I'll send one that way. I'll send one that way. So just take whatever time you need to just kind of go through each. What does the letter stand for? And what does each area sort of involve?
You may remember a little bit from semester that there was something.
I blocked it out.
Okay. All I remembered was the acronym.
Oh, not with the.
Yeah, so like this is kind of like how we did this whole thing with the major project. So one of the major things that each week we send in. You know the design.
Yeah.
So that's what, so you're going to what this was. I think it was.
Way
Yeah, then like what are the, depending on what it is, the activities or what's the information you're trying to get out of that particular part of the steps?
So these ones we remember from last night. We just had this just last night. He said that these.
I don't take that class.
Yeah. So somewhat. He said that these two are pretty closely related. And then I'm trying to remember exactly what the difference is.
And I'm
This is
trying to
just-
take it down,
it's
down
become a
written
little
delivery,
sketchy
how.
Wait,
about
wait a
this.
minute.
So I think
Outcomes and
this, if I remember
objectives.
correctly, this again is where we figure out
what we
like,
need
remember
for
this,
some
this,
problem
Dr.
that's
Forte,
being-
like,
Who's the audience?
problem
Here are,
was,
it's, yeah, the
here's
audience,
the
then we have to
problem,
figure out the
you
What
know,
the-
objective
how,
what is the
how are
problem?
you gonna,
problem.
implement it?
Yeah, what the
Well, I
problem
think that's
is,
more like you're gonna design it.
and delivery.
And then this is actually, I think, you remember? Yeah, I think input, and I think it's also like your actual,
Just write it down, figuring out what materials are gonna be.
like, this is you're actually doing it.
What your
So
materials
this is like your planning.
But
Big
big
things.
things,
Okay, we
big
went through
things
all
are
the,
between, that was my notes, I don't think I have that
you
one.
had different, what, I had more than.
What is that?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so tell me
why-
what's
that's
literally-
why-
Area materials.
Like, this is, there's more to this, I'm drawing a blank on this from both sides, like with the problem. And then there's more subheadings on this. So like,
Your audience, you wanna do an audience, like
Storyboarding out.
who's,
Yeah,
who are the
Audience.
people you're teaching or developing materials
and then
for?
just, so the last one in this, I remember from last time, like this is a little bit flawed because you said it is a single circuit instead of a continuous
Oh,
back and
I
forth.
like
Yeah,
that.
it's the evaluation.
Create
It is.
materials.
So this one,
Integrating technology.
you know, and it's not just from the student, it's also the self-reflective evaluation. So this again, I'm a little sketchy right now, and I think what the difference.
Yeah, and that was what I was
Actually,
looking to
yeah.
see what he,
Right.
he made a comment like
Test
that,
things
like
like that
it's
also.
big.
You remember?
What you saying.
Ooh, wow, that's a big one. Must be important.
What do you have, a multi-subject notebook here?
This is called my daughter,
Yeah.
and
Once
she
you learn
last
to
year,
do
she
it.
needed a white
No, I
notebook.
think this is.
And then
really
when she
doing.
came home at the end of the year,
Yeah.
not most
Well,
of them used.
Okay,
It's
so
like,
just
so there we go.
overhearing. So the design is the planning phase. The develop is where you actually
Integrating the
make the materials that
technology,
you're going
And I
to
have,
use.
I wrote down
So,
testing and debugging.
In the
Plan
case
what
of,
you're gonna make.
and then you actually
you
make it.
make it.
That's, yeah, so developing is you're actually, actually developing or creating the materials. So if it's a game, the design phase would be going through and figuring out what is the game gonna be, how's it gonna work, you know, what are the rules of the game? And then the development phase would be, okay, we need a board, we need to have these graphics on it, we need these cards. we need- And then the implement is actually putting it in front of the students, actually using what you've designed and created, and then actually using it. So in a, again, in a game, that would be actually having people sit down and play the game.
I mean, this is implemented would also be when you're actually instructing.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what
Yeah.
it is you're designing. So yeah, if it's an
So I guess
instructional
if they're
unit,
playing a game and if it's student centered, then there's not really the instruction as much.
right, because you're hoping that the instruction is occurring through them
Yeah,
playing the game.
And
that's what you're saying. But if it's you know, it's like doing the noodles, you're gonna plan out what the noodle's gonna be, then you're gonna actually make all the stuff that goes in the noodle. And in a practical world, that would actually then go in front of students, and they would actually be using the noodle to learn, and you would be using it to instruct. So that's the implementation.
So again,
Oh,
there's
is that why you
obviously
wanted the
more
headset?
to this.
No.
It's just we can help here.
I had it
These
set. I just would
These
rather
go,
not
like, with
have
more
to use it, I would
subheadings,
rather
which,
just go along the road and be able to listen.
Right,
I
right.
was a little bit like on, as far as like you said, you're the problem, you're the audience, you have the, what was about the need or something?
There's a needs assessment, yeah, that usually connects to the problem. If you wanna identify the problem clearly, doing a needs assessment, which is just a process where you
And so
try to
like,
figure out
No,
what
she's
is
not.
the
She's not.
actual
She's not.
deficiency here, you know? Sometimes
one
you
of
go
these-
in thinking this is the problem with my students, this isn't why they're performing well. And then you do a needs assessment, you actually discover, oh, actually, the reason they're not performing well is because of this other thing. So if I'm gonna instruct them and try to overcome that, I wanna focus on what the need, what the actual need is, as opposed to, if you throw stuff over here, they may not get any better.
And here,
So,
and one of these, you gotta think of like your strategies, I assume the design would be like, what are your different strategies
Yeah, what instructional
Yeah.
strategies you're gonna
Oh, okay.
use, you know, it's,
So, but it seems very.
And
That's
then,
good.
I mean, here, like, I think
I
here's
mean,
where
there's
you have to
really
gather
nothing.
materials.
How many pages
What we
and
have to do for
and
this.
then you'll get this out of it.
We'll do this, is what I'm saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
Sounds like the same thing.
yes.
Well, that
Alright.
kind of was mostly like.
That's why that was a prerequisite for this.
you're good?
We're good.
You figured it out?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we
I
got it.
think so.
I think we've drawn as much as we can.
Okay, I mean, this is, as we saw last night and we will see in here, I'm not just gonna say, okay, use the ADDIE model to create, you know, design something. I will give you a template, because depending on the project, there are different types of things that we need to know in each of these areas. And the majority of the on paper kinds of things are gonna be in the A and the D, the first D areas. Once you get to the development, that's where, you know, especially like in this class with the game projects, that's where you're physically like, okay, who's gonna make the board, and what should the board look like, and what kind of playing pieces do we need, and what are the cards gonna look like, or that, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's not gonna really require so much documentation, because the results are gonna be right there. They're what you're gonna physically have in your hands. And the implementation, again, because we're in the context of this class, we're not, at least with the game project, we're not gonna do a full implementation. People will play your game in here to give you some feedback. But the gamification project we're gonna do, that is a project where you will actually take your plan and whatever you've come up with to address that, and you will actually do it with whoever you're targeting. And then you'll get some results and be able to do a little reflective piece on if it went the way you thought it was gonna go, if it achieved the results you wanted to. And that's the evaluation side of things, is completing that circle and seeing whether all of your planning and your development and your delivery all actually did what it was supposed to. And one other thing, and you guys were talking about it too, I'm not sure if it came up with you, but just to acknowledge that this is not a perfect design model, and probably the biggest recognized issue with it is that it's one big loop. So if you literally follow this to the letter, you really don't get any feedback about whether all this work you've done is going to actually achieve the results you want until you've gone through everything and done all the time to develop it and to make the materials and to do all of that. So a lot of times what people will do is borrow from industry, and there's a model called rapid prototyping, where kind of in each little micro step along the way, you try to test what you've just done. And I'm gonna try to build some of that into this class, especially with the game projects, where we get a couple of check-in points, where before you've done all of the work, you're at least getting some feedback about, you know, whether other people think this will work, or if it's gonna be effective, or is it doing what you think it's gonna do. So that is a common thing to try to fold into ADDIE, is to try to get some smaller loops in there, basically just to keep you from getting to the end of a project and then tearing your hair out because you realize you did all this work and then it didn't work, which none of us wants to do, right? So that's sort of the other thing to keep in mind. So, but like I said, when we do our projects, starting with the Powtoon projects, either next week or the week after, there will be an actual partial document that has the very specific things that we're looking for, that you're going to need to think about and answer and plan for and all of that. So this is more just to make sure everybody kind of understands that this is the model that we're going to try to use in here. If you have an instructional design model that you use in your own classroom or in your own profession or whatever, I'm not saying you should replace that with this one, but this just kind of gives us a common language to use and talk about in the context of this class. And the other class, if you're in that. Yeah.
The gamification is the final project, is that correct?
No, that's the game. The
Oh, that's
game
what
is the big
developed.
project. That's the group. The group project, the small group project is the game, where
Okay.
you're creating a full instructional game.
The gamification is a separate. project that we're
Gamification
doing
is a
individually.
slightly smaller, it's a more individual project.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's, once we learn what gamification is, that's just gonna be a way for you to go through that process. Gamifying something is usually much easier and much quicker than developing an entire instructional game. So the sequencing is, we'll do this Powtoon stuff, and then we'll move on to the gamification. Although we'll be starting the game project at the same time because that will take longer time, but you'll be kind of also fitting in bits and pieces of the gamification thing as we go too. All right, so enough about Addie for now. I always feel like I'm saying somebody's name, and I'm waiting for a year where I actually have
Yeah,
somebody
someone.
named Addie in the class. I have an Addie at school right now, but yeah, so. And especially because we're focusing on the ADD, which also
That's
has a
what I
whole different
almost made that
context. Like,
joke, but
yeah, Addie is
left it alone.
ADD. So,
Does she?
no, not my student Addie. No. So, all right. So next thing on the list. Hey, we're like slamming
ahead of
through this
schedule.
stuff. I'm okay with that, right? So, so the next thing then is these 4 C's, and I'll say right off the bat, this is something I came up with. So it's not like you'll go out there in the world and look up 4 C's and find this exact thing. But I have taught at this point in my career enough classes where sort of the main focus of the class is essentially creating multimedia artifacts. I teach recording technology in my school, and I've taught that now for 13 years. Here at Central, I've actually taught video design classes. I am a freelance theatrical designer doing sound design and lighting and video design. So I've spent a lot of time kind of having to evaluate video and audio and what I consider sort of timeline-based media. A lot of people call it multimedia, but multimedia also includes still images and other sorts of things too. So as I did this year after year, I kind of discovered myself coming back to the same sorts of issues and the same sorts of pitfalls and wanting to address those with my students. And in thinking about it, kind of came up with this 4C. It's a little artificial because you try to find words then you're like, oh, I need a 4th C. Like I've got CCC in another letter. What's another word I could use? It would be the right thing. But it actually worked out pretty well, and I think it addresses a lot of things in a pretty clear way. So this is it's here if you want to pull it up on your computers, and I do have it again also in a handout form that we're going to use when we're doing our little evaluations. Hopefully everybody can see that. But what I did is it's in a grid for a reason. So 2 of the C's refer to what I call technical execution. Those are like nuts and bolts issues of either something just being in the project that shouldn't be there, or something technically in the way that the elements were put together was not executed well. I get this a lot in audio projects where everything's kind of going along, and then all of a sudden you have one element that's like twice as loud as everything else, and then it goes back down. So those kinds of technical issues. So things that are really about, it kind of seems to me like the person didn't really know how to use the program they were using, because here's something that they could have easily gotten rid of or taken care of, and they didn't. So that's the left-hand side, are technical issues. And the right-hand side is artistic execution. So these are more about choices that the creator made as opposed to sort of mistakes that they may have made in bringing it together. So that's the right-hand side. And then the other direction, the rows, the top row really addresses looking at each individual item in a project. So if it's an animation, this is looking at a frame and treating the character and the prop and the background and the music and as individual things. And the bottom row then really addresses issues where you're looking at the effectiveness of the whole project. So when you matrix those 2 directions together, you get these 4 options. So you're looking at individual technical things and overall technical things, and then individual artistic things and overall artistic things. And what I found is that sort of separating all that out is useful, because if you try to watch a video or listen to an audio and evaluate everything all at once, it can get overwhelming. So if you can kind of tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to worry about whether this thing actually overall does what it's supposed to do. I'm just going to like pay attention to each of the items and look at them closely and make sure there aren't misspelled words or weird little jitters that happen that kind of catch my eye or things like that. So it's a way to also focus your own attention when you're looking at things like audios and videos and animations and stuff like that. So the 4 C's are clean, clear, consistent, and coherent. And I think they do a pretty good job of capturing what each of those squares is. So clean, the reason I use the word clean is this is really boils down to, is there anything in the project that doesn't belong? And I don't mean because it looks like a poor choice. I mean, it looks like a mistake. So in the recording technology class I teach.
Did you say you had a paper copy of this?
Yes, and I'll be passing these out when we, do you want one now to take notes on?
No,
Or?
I was gonna take notes on it, but I can do them here.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna use these when you're actually
No, that's
watching the
perfect.
videos and use
Okay.
it as a place to scribble evaluations.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. By the way, this stuff, the way that I post this stuff in the Moodle, if it's a now I'm missing the word. If it's a
PDF?
file item in the Moodle, you have the ability to download it yourself too. And I usually only post PDFs because that way formatting doesn't get weird. So anything that I hand out, like even the ADDIE thing I did, it is on the Moodle. So if you want to, for some reason, print out a blank ADDIE grid, you can. So you can also do that on your own if you're somebody that likes to have actual pieces of paper, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's still something to be said for having something in your hands. So clean. So for example, in my students, they do radio ads. They have to create 30-second radio ads as one of their projects. And a lot of times what happens, because we have a couple of sort of isolation rooms where they go in and record their voiceovers, is being in a school. I mean, you know what happens even in an isolation room. The bell rings, the student comes walking down the hall talking loudly to their friend, whatever, you know, those sorts of things. So when I'm listening to their projects and I hear a door slam, or I hear a bell ring, or I hear that extra voice in the background, that's sort of what we're talking about here. That's what I mean by clean, is just that every single thing that is in the project that is being experienced by the user is supposed to be there. So you want to pay attention to things, little blips, even text. Like this is where I put text proofreading. I mean, that's kind of the text equivalent of having something in there that shouldn't be. Uncontrolled environment in videos, that, you know, if you're making a video, any of you who've ever made a video, you want to make sure that like your cat's not going to walk behind you in the middle of the video and knock something off of the counter or something like that. So that's the issue of clean at the sort of at the individual level. So are there things in there that really should just not have been there? The artistic side, you know, especially in instructional videos, but you would think in any video that somebody's going to take the time to make, you want to make sure that the stuff that's there your user can actually understand, especially instructionally. So poor font size choices could be an issue, right? If you're not taking into account the size of the screen that somebody might be watching this video on, and you've got this little caption at the bottom of something, and they literally just can't read it, that's an issue, because you obviously felt it was important to have that text there to be experienced. And if they can't experience it, that's an issue of clarity. They can't get the meaning out of it that they should. In audio, a lot of times one of the biggest pitfalls of audio, and you'll have to be aware of this with Powtoon, is when you have music and somebody talking at the same time. Because certain types of music are going to operate heavily in the exact same frequency range where human voices, where we get meaning out of human speech. And that can actually mask. So you may hear somebody talking, but have a really hard time understanding what they're saying. It's really fascinating. Out of the whole, we as humans can hear from generally from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz in terms of frequencies. There's really a range of about 1,000 frequencies or 1,500 hertz in that range, which is where we get all of our meaning out of speech. If you remove that little band, you can no longer understand what people are saying. It's crazy. You'll still hear voices. You'll recognize that they're voices, but it's gone. It's why old telephones worked, Old telephone systems, they couldn't send the whole frequency range, but they discovered if they just sent that much of it, you could still understand what people were saying. So that's why old telephones, that whole like, it sounds very tinny, but you can still hear what people are saying. That's because they knew that you can just target that. So anyway,
So you're saying like if there's like a din, like you're in a bar or something like that, like you can hear the, I don't know, it's a hard concept for me, but you know, you can kind of hear that their voices, but you can't make out the individual.
yeah, basically, if you've got two things that are operating in the same frequency band, there's what's called masking that happens, and they tend to kind of override each other or cancel each other out. And it becomes hard to distinguish. Your brain just can't, because of the way the brain processes audio, if it's getting two signals that are in the same frequency band, it has a hard time separating them from each other and being able to hear the one over the other and to focus on this one and not on this one. And I get so I'm not obviously going to take the time to get into the whole physiology of sound and all that, but I have partial issues with that because I have tinnitus, which if you don't know, that's partial hearing loss, but it's a ringing in the ears. A lot of people get it temporarily. You go to a loud concert or something and you come home and you hear that like high pitched sound. I have that 100% of the time, every day, all the time. And honestly, what's that?
And yet you're a musician.
Well, it's actually more because I've been a musician.
Okay.
Because that's one of the biggest issues is, and honestly, the strange thing is, you know, I've been a rock musician and people say, oh, well, it's all that rock music you've played. The bigger culprit is actually orchestral musicians. People who play in orchestras are actually experiencing higher sound pressure levels than people who are typically performing on a rock stage. And I was an orchestral musician for a good 35 years of my life or so. So
It's
that's
from
actually
the string instruments, or again, it seems to me
well,
like a big,
more brass. Brass
what
is
I'm
usually
saying.
the biggest culprit.
yeah.
I was gonna say, that brass
So-
section gets very.
And I was a brass player too, so that didn't help.
Yeah.
And being a horn player, I was usually parked right in front of the trumpets, which they're the worst culprits. So, but that's a whole other story. Basically, tinnitus is just in your inner ear. The inner ear gets smaller as it spirals in, and your frequencies basically stop at a certain point in that spiral because of the size of the compression wave. And there's nerve endings that, like little hairs that are in there. And so basically wherever the frequency gets into the inner ear, it stimulates those nerve endings. And then that's how your brain knows what pitch it's hearing. So just like if you rub your skin too long and too hard, you damage the nerve endings. Same thing happens in your inner ear. If those nerve endings get overstimulated or, extended periods of time, those nerve endings basically malfunction. And they just start generating signal all the time, even if they're not receiving a signal. So that's what that ringing is that your inner ear is actually making you think you're hearing sounds that aren't there because the nerve endings are malfunctioning. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get off on that. I'm not sure how we got there. Anyways, so in terms of video, if something's too dark, poorly lit, this is a big issue now that all these people are making their own videos in front of their computers. Being lit by your computer monitor is not necessarily the most effective way for people to actually be able to see you, because if you're lit directly from the front, it removes all contour from your face. Being side lit is much better because then we see the shape of the face and all that. So, Gesundheit.
Thank you.
So those are issues of clarity. It's not that the thing that's there shouldn't be there, which is what cleanliness is. It's that the thing is there and something is keeping us from understanding it the way we should.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Just going back to, now that I'm thinking about it, with clean, like if you record something, because I had this happen, if you record a sound and you can hear, just like you said, you can hear other children in the background, are we going to be using software where you could strip that audio out and still use the video, or is that like super high end and that's not what any of these will do?
Well, if you're,
Or do you just reshoot it and?
yeah, it's the short answer is yes, there is technology that can go in and selectively remove some sounds.
Yeah, but
I mean, karaoke, there are karaoke apps that say that you can just feed a recording into it and it will remove the voice. Again, what those apps are doing is they just sort of are knowing what frequencies the human voice usually uses, and it's just pulling those out of the video or out of the audio. Now, that also means you're removing anything in that same frequency range that should have stayed there. So it's not like once a waveform is created that has everything that's happening at that moment, it's really, really difficult for a program to go in and figure out which of the ups and downs of the compressions belongs to this sound and which belong to this. Now, like Audacity, which is a very popular free audio editing program, they do have a feature called, I think it's noise reduction or something like that, where if you've recorded something and there's like a hiss in the background or a hum in the background, if you tell the program, here's a little snippet of just the hum or just the hiss, it will then analyze that and then try to go in and remove that selectively from your video or from your audio. So if nobody else is making sounds, it should go away pretty well. If somebody's talking, you will still probably hear some of that hiss in the background, and it will probably change the tone quality of the voice a little bit too. So there are ways to kind of get there, but it is an extremely difficult thing to do. I have students coming to me all the time because they're singing in some talent show or something, and they're like, oh, I want to sing to this song. Can you take the voice off of it? And I'm like, not unless you can get in touch with Capitol Records and have me send the original multi-track master, and I can remaster it for you. But there are some things that can get partially there. So it's a good question.
No, sorry, no,
Yeah, it's Fourier transformations and all sorts of things. It gets really fun.
it hurts and all the waves. I was like, oh
Yeah, physics of sound. That's the first unit I do in my recording tech class. And the kids go, physics? I didn't sign up for a physics class. I was here to make records. All right, so then moving on now sort of to the overall level. So consistency, and this was honestly a place where I did have to search a little bit to find words that I was happy with. But consistency, I use that to mean that now that you have all these individual elements, are they assembled in a way that is not going to cause the listener to suddenly go, well, what was that? Or why was that? So this is where you get like uneven volumes between elements. Consistency would be like dealing with transitions, honestly. I kind of use that here, although that's a coherence thing too. Jump cuts, meaning that, and I see this a lot now with people who are posting videos online where they're interviewing themselves or they've interviewed somebody. And I don't know if they're just trying to make the video shorter, but it's like they're going in and removing every fourth or fifth word the person says. So you constantly have these like little jumps in the video. I see it a lot now. I'm watching a lot of these like DIY videos and things like that. And I don't know why people feel the need to do this unless they are just, maybe they say a lot. And they don't want people to hear them saying a lot. And they've gone back and they've removed all the ums. But then what you end up with is this video where you're like constantly like these little jerks. And maybe that's okay, but anything that is going to draw your viewer away from the thing you're trying to get them to learn or to understand is not going to be a good thing. So this is sort of the technical assembly of things. It's just making sure that once all your elements are in there, that they're assembled in a way that contributes to the whole. And then coherence, this is like your overall artistic vision of the project. Are all the things that you put in there, do they contribute to the project? So this is a big issue, like multiple graphic design styles. So in Powtoon, if you were searching around, you may have noticed that they have different styles that you can use. There's like one that looks like just outlines of characters. It's like black and white. And then they've got another one that's a little more cartoony, and then they've got others that are more realistic. And so if you build a video or an animation, and this character is black and white, and this character is realistic, and this character is animated or cartoony, artistically that's kind of a no-no, because now you're leaving your viewer can't kind of figure out where they're supposed to be. Right? It's like watching the movie that you thought was going to be a comedy, and then all of a sudden, like, people are getting their heads chopped off. You're like, what just happened in this movie? So that kind of an issue. this is where I put uncontrolled use of transitions. My wife and I, who used to actually do video production sort of as a sidebar, came up with a model. We were like, just because you can use a transition doesn't mean you should use a transition. It's great that all these programs give you this whole palette of ways that you can transition from one slide to another, but it's kind of a sure sign that someone doesn't really know what they're doing or have a vision when you watch a PowerPoint or something like that, and it's like they wanted to use every transition available to them. So everyone is a different transition, That starts to draw attention to the transitions. Your viewer starts going, oh, I wonder what transition they're going to use next. That has nothing to do with what you're trying to teach them or show them or instruct them on. So, generally, if you're going to use transitions, pick one or maybe two and just use those two. If you're going to use fonts, pick one or two. Eventually, if you haven't already, you'll have a class with Dr. Abed that's all about, a lot of nodding heads already, right? What does he say about fonts? Right? He's
Yeah,
got,
but
he
one,
could,
but it can have the help, like.
Helvetica.
Helvetica.
Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
favorite, remember that.
so,
Pick a font
you have
that
to
has
pick
multiple.
versions,
versions,
yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those things. I think when the technology becomes available, everyone's like, woohoo, kid in a candy store, everything. And then you end up feeling sick because you ate too much candy. So use whatever you're using for a reason. Have an overall concept. Is this video meant to be humorous? Is it meant to be serious? Is it meant to be kind of dry and instructional, or are you trying to make it more personalized? And then once you have that theme in mind, just make sure that as you're choosing all of your elements, that they support that theme, that they're going to tie into that, so that you're not, again, you don't want to draw your viewer out of the moment. You don't want them to be distracted by anything that's not the content that you're trying to achieve. All right. So that's my framework, and hopefully that makes enough sense. There is crossover. I will acknowledge that. I've got these nice clean black lines between these sections, but obviously there's going to be some fuzziness. Is this about the overall coherence, or is this because of an individual choice? In the end, it doesn't really matter as long as you're keeping these various things in mind as you're working. All right. So questions about that framework? Does that make sense more or less? All right, so here is what I would like to do with this. Is I've got a page on the Moodle called Example Videos to Analyze. Don't start playing them yet because you don't have to watch all 4 of them. And what I tried to do was I found 4, I just pulled these from YouTube. So these are things that are out there in the general domain. For the most part, they are all basically intended to be instructional in one way or another. Some of them are a little more explicitly instructional, but so they're not meant to be entertainment videos. These are all videos that are meant to explain something or instruct something. So they all have that goal, and they're also all animated. So I wanted to keep it sort of at that level because you start getting into live video, and that opens up a whole other can of worms that we will look at in other contexts. So at the ground level, these are all basically identical. They're also all about the same length. They're somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes. So I was looking for short videos because I didn't want to have people have to watch videos for half an hour. So they're short, they're instructional, they're animations, much along the lines of what you might be creating. In fact, I think at least 1 or 2 of them, yeah, this one was made in Powtoon, but it was made in Powtoon in like 2014 or 15 or something. So it's sort of an older version of it. What was, actually I should be able to figure it out here. There's one of them.
Does that consistent, because I don't remember, does that consistently stay on Powtoon? Like they're always going to have their logo there in the corner?
That's watermarked onto the video. That depends on how much you've paid Powtoon.
Do we need headphones for this?
You will, yes, they do have. So the last one, and this is what I was looking for, the Go Animate. This last one was done in Go Animate, which is another like make your own animations like Powtoon sort of thing. So here's what I'd like to do. Here's how we will approach this. Is again, I want to divide up into 2 groups, but maybe we divide up differently this time, just so different people are working with different people. And within the group, then, and I guess we could even go to 2, 2, and 3 if people wanted to, or we could go with 4 and 3. It doesn't really matter. Is I'll have the one group just look at videos 1 and 2, and I'll have the other group look at just videos 3 and 4. And the idea will be I've got enough of these so each group can have one for each video that they're watching. And the idea would be for everybody in your group to watch the first of the videos, look at it in the context of the 4 C's, kind of evaluate it if you were to give it a grade. And then once you've all watched a video, come together, discuss what you saw. Different people will probably pick up on different things depending on what you like to look for or what sticks out at you. And then go on to the second video and kind of rinse and repeat. Watch the second video. Don't watch both of them back to back. Watch one, analyze it. Watch the other one, analyze it, just so that your brain can be focused on the one. And I don't want you to
Watch them separate.
Yeah, this isn't about necessarily comparing the 2 videos with each other. So I want to keep them as separate evaluations, as it were. And then, somebody in the group who maybe has neater handwriting in the space that's here, maybe just jot down some of the things that you came up with, either good or bad. And hopefully you will find both. I don't think any of these is perfect, but I don't think any of them is a complete disaster. There's going to be variation within that. So yeah, and then once both groups have gone through their 2 videos and had time to evaluate and jot some notes down, we'll do a quick debrief with everyone together and just kind of see what you came up with and what maybe things you struggled with in terms of being able to evaluate it and whatnot. So that makes sense.
So
You get to become the teacher.
we're each gonna watch it and think about it. Then we're gonna get together and talk and write on
Within your group, yes.
Right, but we're gonna watch them separate in our group. Like I'm
One
watching
group's
it.
doing one.
You're
Yeah, I
watching
think-
it and then talk.
Yes, yeah, I think
We'd have to, right.
I think that's more
But one at a
honestly
time,
just
watch one.
But not
Me-
together,
Not
because you
together.
can't both. hear
right,
each other.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's more of a practical thing. I
Okay.
think it'll just be easier for you to be on your own set of
Yeah.
headphones. And
Watch it and get
if
together and
if you notice, we try to be good about this, but occasionally students unplug the headphones from the back of the computer. So if you go to play and you're not hearing any sound coming out of your headphones, and you take your headphones off and you hear sound coming out of your computer, just double check that it's plugged in. They should be, but I do know occasionally people unplug them to plug in their own headphones. So how do we want to divvy up this time? We go front back or
We want to
I don't-
just
I
do
don't
like 2, 2, you said switch it up, so we're not together.
or we could do why don't we do like 3 and 4? Then we're kind of
So I'm
going
with Jill and
half-
Taylor.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
okay.
sort of half of each group from before is with a half of. So
we're doing
I'll
3 and 4.
I don't know who
You're
feels
doing
like.
4, we're doing 1 and 2?
Yep.
Okay.
We're doing one and
So-
2.
We're doing
Yeah,
one
we'll
and
do.
two?
Yeah,
We'll
we're
have
doing 1 and
the
2.
front trio do videos 1 and
Okay,
2.
so we're gonna watch 1
Yeah.
and then
So
talk.
watch
And
number 3 first.
if you aren't aware of this, these are all embedded YouTube videos. But when you go over the video, you do have the ability if you down in the bottom right hand corner where it says YouTube and then there's the little square brackets. If you click on that, it'll make the video full screen. So and hopefully there won't be ads, but you may also, we just never know with YouTube. You may have to struggle through an ad before your video plays. All right, so off and running.